There is a piece of ground in the center of London, under some of the most expensive streets on earth, that one family has owned for more than 300 years. Through wars, through market crashes, through everything, they have never sold a single acre of it. Not one. Tonight, the 13 rules that make that possible. Not tips, not tricks, the actual operating code of old money. Because here's the other half of the story. Two brothers built one of the great American fortunes of their age. When they died, the money was enormous, the business was a national name, and the future looked secure. 5 years later, the whole thing was gone, sold. The family simply walked away. Same sendings, and the difference was not luck. It was not talent, and it was not even the size of the money. The family that kept its fortune for 300 years and the family that lost everything in 5 were separated by something quieter than all of that. A set of rules about money that the people who keep wealth for generations follow almost without thinking, and that the rest of us are simply never taught to see. 13 of them. And the 13th is the one that explains all the others, because it is the only one written in the language of what happens when you ignore the first 12. Let me show you what they won't. Rule 1. Land is not sold. It is leased. In 1677, a marriage joined the Grosvenor family to about 500 acres of swampy, half-forgotten ground on the western edge of London. At the time, it was worth very little. It was marsh. But over the following centuries, that marshland became something else entirely. It became Mayfair. It became Belgravia. It became some of the most valuable real estate that has ever existed anywhere on the planet. And here is the move that matters. The one thing the family did that most people would never think to do. Starting in the 1720s, they refused to sell it. Instead, they granted what were called long building leases. Developers came in and built the houses at their own expense. Beautiful houses, whole districts of them. But the ground underneath, the freehold, never left the family. When a lease finally ran out, the buildings on top of the land reverted back to the owner. The family did not sell the Golden Goose. They rented it, again and again, for 300 years. Follow that forward and you arrive at Hugh Grosvenor, who inherited the dukedom in 2016 at just 25 years old, with a fortune estimated, by one account, at close to £10 billion before he was even 40. He still owns roughly 300 acres of Mayfair and Belgravia that his family has refused to sell for 3 centuries. And because they own the ground itself, they can dictate what happens on top of it. They even use legal clauses called covenants to control the land. They have kept one of their streets from turning into a row of identical chain stores. They have preserved the old trees in the garden squares of Belgravia. They shaped the character of one of the most expensive districts on earth, decade after decade, for one simple reason. They never let go of it. Here is the lesson underneath the story. Selling an asset gives you one payment, one good day, and then it is someone else's asset forever. Leasing that same asset forever gives you an income that never stops, and compounded across 300 years, it quietly beats almost any sale you could ever make. The ordinary instinct is to sell the thing that has finally gone up and enjoy the win. The old money instinct is the exact reverse. You never sell the thing that produces. You hold the ground, you let other people build on it, and you wait longer than anyone else is willing to. Rule 2. Debt is a tool, not a lifestyle. By the end of the 1960s, a shopkeeper in Arkansas named Sam Walton had a problem that would sound familiar to a lot of people. He had borrowed money from every bank that would take his call. He kept borrowing to open the next store, and the next, financing his own growth on credit. And in his own words, the debt was beginning to weigh on him. That is a direct admission from one of the most successful retailers in history. The debt was beginning to weigh on me. What he did next is the rule. He did not borrow more to cover the gap. He did not double down and hope the next round of stores would outrun the interest. In 1970, he took the company public, and he used the money to pay the debt down, even though his wife Helen resisted at first, because she wanted the family's finances to stay private. The instinct of a driven builder is to keep control at all costs. Everything inside the family and inside the fence. Walton did the opposite. He gave up a slice of control, opened the company to outsiders, specifically in order to get out from under the weight of the debt. And then comes the part that tells you who he really was. Having built one of the largest fortunes on earth, he kept driving an old pickup truck. He flew in coach. He stayed in ordinary roadside motels. He got his hair cut at the barber shop on the town square in Bentonville, Arkansas. Forbes has noted that his heirs, Rob, Jim, and Alice, carried those same restrained habits forward rather than exploding into spectacle. So the lesson is not the bumper sticker version, never borrow. That is not it at all. Debt used to build something is a tool, and Walton used that tool hard for years. Debt that starts to weigh on you, in Walton's own exact word, is a signal, and the signal says act now, even when the fix feels like the opposite of your instinct. Here is what that means for you. The question is never simply, do I have debt? The real question, the old money question, is whether the debt is building you or whether it has quietly turned around and begun to own you. Rule 3. The balance sheet is never said out loud. In 1841, two brothers opened a small dry goods shop in a Dutch town called Sneek. That shop grew into the clothing retailer known across Europe as C&A, owned by the Brennemeyer family. And for nearly 200 years, this family did something that runs completely against the noise of our time. They said nothing. They never publicly disclosed their revenue, their profit, or their ownership structure. They became one of the most secretive business families on earth, running everything through a holding company from a deliberately anonymous office in Zug, Switzerland. And then something happened that tells you everything. In 2025, for the first time in almost 2 centuries, the family began to open a portion of its assets to outside investors. The silence was never an accident, and it was never because they were too small to be noticed. It was not that they lacked the option to go public. They had that option the entire time, for 184 years, and every generation looked at it and refused. The secrecy was a choice, made and remade deliberately, parent to child. Now, how much is the family actually worth? Even that is hard to pin down, and it is hard on purpose. One index puts the personal net worth at somewhere north of $18 billion. Another measure counts tens of billions more in assets under the group's control. The figures do not match, and that is exactly the point. They are measuring different things, personal wealth versus assets managed, and the family has never once felt the need to resolve the confusion for you. The fog is not a failure of reporting. The fog is the product. The lesson here has 2 edges, and both are sharp. Not revealing your numbers protects you in any negotiation, because no one on the other side of a table can push against a position they cannot even see. But keeping quiet also protects you from something larger. It protects you from scrutiny, from the envy that success attracts, and in certain cases, from real physical danger to your family. Both reasons live side by side. So while the culture all around us begs everyone to broadcast their net worth and turn every win into content, old money does the opposite by pure reflex. It treats its own numbers as the very last thing it would ever say out loud. Rule 4. You earn the job before you inherit the title. Phillips Ford II was the grandson of the man whose name was on the building. He was, one day, going to run the entire company. And in 1940, where did that heir begin? In the dynamometer room in Dearborn, testing engines. From there he moved through the River Rouge plant and the engineering test garage. This was technical work on the factory floor, hands dirty, learning how the thing was actually made. It was not an executive office with his name on the door. He only became an executive vice president in 1944 and president of the company in September of 1945 at 28 years old. And even that came early only because his father, Edsel, died suddenly in 1943, and the family needed the young man to leave the Navy in wartime and step in before he otherwise would have. By the time the title landed on him, he already knew, in his hands, how the company actually worked. And this is not just one family's habit or one lucky temperament. Far away in Germany, the Merck family, whom we will come back to later tonight, did something colder and more permanent with it. They wrote it into a formal rulebook. Their family constitution requires that members prove real professional competence in another career, somewhere else, before they are permitted to join the family company at all. You must go succeed on your own, where your last name does not open the door, before you may come home to the family business. It is not a suggestion whispered at a holiday dinner. It is written law, binding on paper. The lesson is the order of operations, and the order is everything. Competence, tested in real work, comes before authority over real capital, never the other way around. The common path runs in reverse. It hands the young heir the title first and simply hopes the ability quietly shows up later to match the business card. Old money refuses that gamble and reverses the sequence on purpose. Here is what that means for you. Authority that was earned before anyone was handing out titles behaves completely differently under pressure than authority that was merely received as a gift. The first kind has been tested. The second kind is about to be. Rule 5. Ownership is a duty to maintain, not an excuse to replace. Hans Rausing was an heir to the Tetra Pak packaging fortune, a family whose wealth has been estimated at around $12 billion. And he was famous, among the people who actually knew him, for something that sounds almost like a contradiction. He was relentlessly frugal. He lived modestly on an estate in the English countryside. He drove old, battered cars, the kind you would never look at twice. He avoided the private jets, the yachts, the glittering parties his fortune could easily have paid for. And part of that was hard-earned caution. After a real kidnapping attempt against the family in 1989, they deliberately pulled their public profile even lower. For them, discretion was rooted partly in physical safety, not only good manners. There is J. Paul Getty, at one point simply one of the richest men alive on the planet. The stories about his thrift are almost comic, and they are true. He installed a working payphone inside his own mansion at Sutton Place so that his house guests would pay for their own telephone calls. He reused old envelopes, crossing out the previous address. He wrote his replies in the margins of the very letters people sent to him, rather than spend a fresh sheet of paper. And once, arriving at a dog show in London at 10 minutes to 5 in the afternoon, he learned that the 5-shilling entrance fee would drop by half at 5 o'clock exactly. So he made his wealthy friends walk with him for 10 full minutes around the block, killing time on the pavement, so that the whole group could go in at the cheaper price. Now, you can laugh at that, and people certainly did. But look closer, because the lesson is not really about the money that was saved. The saved money was trivial, even insulting, a single phone call, half of one entry fee. It meant nothing to a man of Getty's scale, so why do it? The point is the reflex. The frugality of people who already have absolutely everything is not about the specific coins at all. It is about keeping, decades after they have arrived and could easily stop caring, the exact same reflex of attention that built the fortune in the first place. The moment you stop noticing the small waste is the moment you tell yourself the game is over. These families never send that signal. And here's what that means for you, long before you ever have a mansion to run. The habits that get you to the top are the same habits that keep you there. The danger is believing that arriving means you get to put them down. Rule 6. Staying private is a financial decision, not a personality trait. In 1946, in the town of Alba in northern chocolate, that company, Ferrero, went on to become a global giant, the maker of some of the most recognized sweets in the world. And across 3 generations, through extraordinary growth, the family has kept it 100% private. They have never taken it public. Control runs through a holding company based in Luxembourg, a structure that lets them plan and acquire over the long term, with centralized decisions and without the pressure of quarterly earnings reports that a public company answers to every 90 days. And do not mistake private for timid, because this family is anything but. In 2018, Ferrero bought Nestlé's entire United States candy business, a major, aggressive, headline strategic acquisition. And they did it without needing the approval or even the opinion of a single outside public shareholder. No earnings call to survive, no activist investors to placate. Just a family deciding, on its own timeline, to make a large and confident move. Private did not mean small. Private did not mean slow. Private meant free. Here is the honest lesson, and I'm going to include the cost, because old money always counts the cost before it counts the benefit. Staying private is not free. When you stay private, you give up easy access to enormous pools of public capital. You give up a certain kind of liquidity. Those are real prices and not small. But in exchange, you buy one very specific thing that is almost impossible to purchase any other way. You buy the right to never have to justify a decision every 90 days to a crowd of strangers who will not be here in 90 years. For a family that thinks in generations, the trade is not even close. They will pay the price of privacy gladly, because what it buys them is the one thing the public markets can never sell: time. Rule 7. Some assets exist to survive a crisis, not to beat the market. Baron Hans Heinrich Thyssen Bornemisza spent decades assembling what became the second largest private art collection in the entire world, behind only the British Royal Collection. More than 1,600 paintings. And according to reporting by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, he treated that art not only as passion, but, in their phrase, as a way to move money. In 1993, he sold that collection to the Spanish state for $350 million, at a time when Sotheby's valued it at more than $2 billion. He was offered, in effect, a $2 billion asset and let it go for $350 million, in exchange for a long-term deal to keep the collection preserved and on public view in Madrid. A pure profit maximizer would call that insane. For him, the collection was never only a number to cash out at the peak. Now, I have to be very clear about what this rule is and what it is absolutely not, because this channel does not give you financial advice, and it never will. This is not me telling you to go buy art or gold or land. This is about how a certain kind of family thinks. Tangible assets, like great art and like land, are not held by these families to maximize return. They are held to survive the scenarios where ordinary financial assets fail completely. War, hyperinflation, the collapse of a currency. A painting on a wall and a title to land do not care what a stock exchange does on a Tuesday. These things are insurance, not a growth engine, and the disciplined old money mind keeps those two ideas in separate drawers. To give you a sense of scale, one major survey of the world's family offices found real assets like property made up only around a tenth of their strategic allocation in recent years. A slice, deliberately, not the whole pie. It is the seatbelt, not the car. But the day you need it, nothing else in the vehicle will do. Rule 8. The rules are written down so goodwill never has to be tested. In 1668, an apothecary named Friedrich Jacob Merck bought a small pharmacy in the German town of Darmstadt. More than 350 years and 13 generations later, his descendants still own that original pharmacy, and they control Merck, the oldest continuously operating pharmaceutical and chemical company in the world. And do not confuse it with the American company of a similar name. This is the older, German original. Here is how a family stays intact for 13 generations. In 1888, they wrote a family constitution. Today, that document runs to around 150 pages, and the family treats it as law. It sits on a rolling contract, currently locked in place until the year 2040, and it does something remarkable. It forbids any individual family member from selling their stake in the company. You cannot simply cash out. The only door to exit opens when the rolling contract itself comes up for renewal, years in the future, not on any single person's whim. And here's the detail that shows just how carefully this was engineered. Today, there are around 300 members of the Merck family, over 150 of them shareholders, and yet no single one of them holds more than about 2 or 3% of the holding company individually. The family together controls roughly 70% of one of the oldest companies in the world, yet that power is spread so thin that no one branch, no single strong personality can ever seize the wheel. And to run the thing, there are 2 separate boards. A corporate board of non-family professionals operates the business day to day, while a board made up only of family members watches over it from above. Ownership and management held firmly apart, on purpose. The lesson is hard, and it is deeply wise, and it is the opposite of sentimental. Written, binding rules survive the exact conflicts that simple trust in the family never could. The Constitution is not there for the good years, when everyone gets along. Anyone can share a fortune in the good years. It exists for the other moment, the one a family that lasts long enough always eventually faces. When there is a bitter disagreement, when one heir wants out and another wants control, when goodwill alone would not be enough to hold the thing together. Here is what it means, stripped down. These families do not build their structures assuming everyone will stay kind and reasonable forever. They build them assuming that, someday, someone will not. That is not cynicism. That is love with a longer memory. Rule 9. Concentration builds the fortune. Diversification keeps it. In 1959, Perry Bass and his 4 sons each inherited about $2.8 million from the Texas oil fortune of a great-uncle. Combined, a little over $11 million. A very large sum and completely tied to one thing: oil. And this is the fork in the road where most oil fortunes eventually die, still clutching the barrel that made them. The Bass family did the opposite, and they did it with nerve. They diversified, aggressively, moving the money out of the ground and into the wider economy. In 1984, Sid Bass took a 25% stake in the Walt Disney Company for $478 million, becoming Disney's single largest shareholder and, in the process, helping to defend that company from a hostile takeover. Think of how far that is from a Texas oil derrick. His brother Robert co-founded the firm that grew into TPG, a private equity giant that today manages well over $200 billion across the globe. And then, in 2017, decades after they had already moved so much of their capital out of oil, the brothers sold off their remaining oil and gas holdings in the Permian Basin to ExxonMobil for $5.6 billion in stock. They did not cling to the barrel. They sold it, on their terms, when it suited the plan. Follow the whole arc because it is staggering. A little over $11 million of oil inheritance, split 4 ways in 1959, became, by one Forbes estimate, more than $9 billion held between just 2 of those brothers. And it did so specifically by leaving oil behind. The money did not simply grow larger inside the same box. It changed its shape entirely, from petroleum to entertainment to private equity to the diversified holdings of a modern dynasty. The barrel was the seed. It was never meant to be the tree. The lesson here is one of the hardest things for a successful person to accept, because it asks you to let go of the very thing you are most proud of. The original source of your fortune, the oil well, the one great store, the single factory, the one skill the whole world rewarded you for, is the starting point. It is not the destination. The very thing that made you rich is the thing you must eventually become willing to grow beyond. Families that stay wealthy across many generations tend to move out of the concentration that first made them wealthy, precisely because they refuse to let the entire future of the family ride on the one bet that happened to win in the past. Here's what that means for you. Loyalty to the thing that made you is a beautiful instinct in a person, and a dangerous one in a portfolio. The winning bet of one generation is very often the trap of the next. Rule 10. The time horizon is measured in generations, not fiscal quarters. SC Johnson, the household products company from Racine, Wisconsin, has now been led by the same family for 5 straight generations, more than 130 years, from the founder down to the great-great-grandson who leads it today. And because the company has stayed private, it is, in its own words, not subject to Wall Street. It does not answer to the demand for a better number every 3 months. Back in 1976, the 4th-generation leader of the family put the company's guiding philosophy into a written document, one that grew from principles his own predecessor had already summarized decades before that. And that document is still openly cited by the 5th generation as their guide for making real decisions today. Not a plaque on a wall that everyone ignores, a living compass, written down, passed hand to hand, and still actually followed a half-century later. Structural, and when you do not have to answer to public shareholders every 3 months, you remove the single greatest distorting pressure in all of modern business, the relentless pressure to optimize the next 90 days at the direct expense of the next 90 years. That pressure is invisible, but it bends almost everything. And here is what that means for the way you think about your own choices, even at a much smaller scale. Look closely, and you will find that almost every bad long-term decision, in a business or in a life, is really just a good short-term decision that someone felt forced to make. The layoff to hit a number, the corner cut to make a deadline, the compromise to keep the peace this week. Remove the force, take away the thing making you optimize for right now, and you can finally do what almost no one gets to do. You can choose the decade over the quarter and the generation over the year. Rule 11. Direct inheritance is limited on purpose. The rest becomes structure. When Conrad Hilton, the founder of the hotel empire, wrote his will, he did something that shocked his own family. He left 13.5 million shares of Hilton Hotels, 97% of his entire estate, not to his son Barron, but to the charitable foundation he had created back in 1944. His son was given only an option, a right to buy those shares, in order to keep family control of the company, not the shares themselves, just the option to purchase them. The foundation fought that option in court. It took a full decade to resolve, and when a 1988 appeals decision finally settled the matter, look carefully at how the pieces landed, because the arrangement is the lesson. Barron received 4 million shares. The foundation received 3.5 million, and the remaining 6 million shares were placed into a charitable trust set up in Barron's name. Not one of the three parties walked away holding direct, unrestricted control over the fortune. Every single piece of it passed through and remained inside a structure. The money did not land in anyone's open hands. It landed in an architecture. The part that turns a single strange will into a genuine rule of this world. On Christmas Day of 2007, Baron Hilton, the very son who had been on the receiving end of all of this, announced that he would do the exact same thing to his own heirs that his father had done to him. He would leave around 97% of his own estate, then estimated at over $2 billion, to that same Hilton Foundation. He had lived through the decade-long fight himself, and he chose it again. And just as before, predictably, the plan was contested by members of the family. The lesson is deeply counterintuitive. Limiting what passes directly to your heirs and deliberately routing the rest into structure, into a foundation, a purchase option, a trust, is not a failure of estate planning. It is the plan. That is what the plan looks like when it is working. Even when it triggers a lawsuit, and it very often does, the structure itself survives the conflict. The people fight, loudly, for years. The framework holds. And notice, above all, that the pattern was repeated on purpose into the very next generation. That is not an accident. It is a family teaching itself, deliberately, across decades, one hard lesson. Control is something you route through architecture that outlives you. It is not something you simply hand, warm and whole and unprotected to a person, however much you love them. Rule 12. Marriage is treated as a balance sheet event. This one is uncomfortable, so let me be careful and precise. The private banks and the family offices that serve the very wealthy, firms like J.P. Morgan Private Bank and the Family Office Exchange, describe this openly in their own published guidance. Among legacy families, the prenuptial agreement is treated as a standard, expected tool. Its purpose is straightforward. It keeps inherited assets and trust assets outside of the marital division if a marriage happens to end. And critically, it is not handled the way most people imagine a prenup, as some awkward, insulting document produced alone at the last possible minute before a wedding. It is coordinated calmly, in advance, woven together with the trusts and the governance structure the family already has in place. It is part of the architecture, not a weapon pulled out at the door. I want to be very clear about what this is and what it is not, because it is so easy to hear this cynically and stop listening. This is not about being cold toward love. It is not about expecting the marriage to fail. It is about extending, to the one event that most reliably divides a great fortune in half, the very same calm discipline these families already apply to everything else in their financial lives. They do not treat marriage as the one subject too emotional, too sacred to plan around. They treat it as one more eventuality to be handled with structure and with honesty, out in the open, before the emotion of the moment arrives, rather than in the wreckage afterward. And here's the quiet truth underneath it. Refusing to plan is not romance. It is just avoidance wearing romance as a costume. For these families, the taboo is the luxury they cannot afford, and the plan, made honestly and early, is simply the discipline. Rule 13. No structure is also a decision, and it is the decision that usually loses. Everything so far has been about what these families built. Leaseholds, constitutions, foundations, boards, rules on top of rules. And you might reasonably ask, is all of that really necessary? Is it not a little paranoid, a little heavy, all these documents and locks and restrictions for money that is already made? So let me show you the answer to that question in the form of the family we opened with, the one that lost everything in 5 years. John and Horace Dodge were the Dodge brothers. They built Dodge Brothers into one of the most important automobile companies in America. They were, at their peak, an industrial power. And in 1920, both brothers died, the same year. They left behind enormous wealth, a major company, and their heirs. What they did not leave behind was any structure at all. No succession plan, no family constitution, no board designed to carry the thing forward. Nothing like the architecture we have been describing this entire video. Just money and people and no rules connecting the two. Now, and this is important, the company was not badly run in the technical sense. It was not sunk by incompetence at the desk. It had a competent, experienced professional manager at the top, keeping the machine running. But the heirs themselves, the widows and the children, showed little real interest in actually running an automobile company. And who could entirely blame them? They preferred, understandably, humanly, to simply live off the enormous fortune that was already sitting right there. The problem was not that they were bad people. The problem is that with no structure pulling them towards stewardship, no constitution, no family board, no earn the job rule, no requirement to prove themselves first, that very natural preference had absolutely nothing to check it. Nothing pushed back. The path of least resistance ran straight downhill, and there was no architecture standing in the way. So watch how fast it goes when nothing is holding it. In 1925, just 5 years after the founders died, the family sold the entire company to an investment bank for $146 million in cash, with tens of millions more directed to charity. At the time, that $146 million payment was the single largest cash transaction in the entire history of the United States. Let that register. A record-setting, history-making sum of money paid to this one family. And here is the detail that should stop you cold, sitting right next to that triumph. In that very same year, 1925, the year they cashed out, Dodge Brothers had already slid from the leadership of the American automobile industry all the way down to 5th place. 5th, a total collapse of market position from the very top of an entire industry in only 5 years after the founders were gone. In a puff of smoke, the way it does in the movies, the record cash payout was real and it was gigantic, but without any structure to hold it, to direct it, to bind the next generation to something larger and more demanding than their own comfort, the fortune did what unstructured fortunes always eventually do. It scattered. Later generations of the family carried documented histories of broken marriages and repeated financial rescues between relatives, one branch quietly bailing out another, the money flowing out through 100 small, unguarded doors. The engine was sold. The famous name passed into other hands entirely. And the family that had once built a genuine industrial empire slowly became a cautionary tale that most people today do not even connect to the cars that still carry the name. And now you understand why Rule 13 is the one that explains all the others. Every single rule before it, the land held for 3 centuries, the debt paid down, the numbers kept silent, the heir sent to the factory floor, the Constitution written in 1888, the inheritance routed through a foundation, all of it is a different answer to the same terrifying question. What happens to this after I am gone? The Dodge story is what happens when the answer is nothing. When the answer is, we will figure it out. We trust each other. We do not need all that. Money at industrial scale, with none of the structures we have walked through tonight, does not last 3 generations. It can be gone in less than 1. So, let us bring it home, because I did not walk you through 13 rules just to admire other people's fortunes. Step back and look at all of them at once, and you will notice something that ties every single one together. Not one of these 13 rules is about getting rich. Read that again slowly, because it is the whole secret. Not one of them. The land held for 3 centuries. The debt paid down instead of piled higher. The silence around the numbers. The title that had to be earned on the factory floor. The frugal reflex that never switched off. The company kept stubbornly private. The crisis assets held like insurance. The Constitution written in 1888. The diversification out of the very thing that made them. The horizon measured in generations. The inheritance routed through structure. The marriage planned like a balance sheet. And the dark warning of the family that had none of it. Every single one of them is about the same thing. Not making money. Keeping it. Carrying it safely across the one border that quietly destroys the vast majority of fortunes. The handoff from the people who built the wealth to the people who merely received it. And here is the single thread that runs through all 13. The thing that makes them one idea instead of a list. In every single case, the family trades a short-term win for a structure that will outlive the person who built it. Grosvenor gives up the enormous one-time sale in exchange for 3 centuries of ground rent. Walton gives up a piece of his own control in order to kill the debt. Ferrero gives up easy access to public money in order to escape the 90-day leash. Merck gives up any single member's freedom to sell, so that the whole can never be broken apart. Hilton gives up the simple pleasure of handing the money straight to his son, in order to route it through something built to last longer than either of them. Over and over and over, it is the same trade. The individual gives something up, willingly, today, so that the family keeps something far bigger tomorrow. Now here is what this also means for you, whatever the size of the thing your 300 acres of London, or an art collection, or a company, to use any of this. You need the way of thinking that sits underneath all of it. So ask yourself the old money question about your own money. Not the common question, how do I win this year? How do I get a little more right now? But the deeper one, what have I built that would survive me? Is there anything in your financial life today with a real structure around it, something designed to hold even when the people involved are tired or grieving or fighting? Or is all of it, quietly, simply resting on the hope that everyone will keep getting along and keep making wise choices and keep being kind forever? Because hear this clearly, that exact hope, the Dodge brothers had that hope too. They were not fools and they were not poor. They just trusted that it would work itself out. Structure is nothing more than hope made mechanical. It is care, engineered so that the future does not depend on everyone staying wise and staying kind in the one moment when they might not. So think back, one last time, to where we began tonight. 2 pieces of ground, one held quietly, patiently, for more than 300 years by a family that followed rules exactly like these. And one sold off and scattered in just 5 short years by a family that followed none of them. The distance between those 2 endings, the entire distance, was never luck, and it was never the size of the money. Both families had more than enough. The distance was 13 quiet decisions, made, and then made again, and then made again, generation after generation, long after the people who first made them were gone. If this is the way you want to think about wealth, not as a lottery ticket, but as a legacy, then you are in the right place, and you should subscribe and stay with us, because this is the entire reason this channel exists. And next time, we are going to step inside just one of these families and take apart the single document that held them together for over a century, page by page, to see exactly how a fortune is engineered to survive the people who inherit it. Because in the end, the old thing, the thing they never quite teach you, is knowing how to make it last. God bless you.